Imagine spending years building your dream mansion high in the mountains, a place of peace surrounded by forests with a view that could steal anyone's breath away. Now, imagine returning home to find it reduced to rubble, destroyed not by nature, but by the very HOA that was supposed to protect the community. That's exactly what happened here. But the HOA didn't know one very important detail. The man they tried to crush wasn't just a homeowner, he was their governor. The story begins on a quiet morning when David, a successful businessman and respected figure in his state, returned from a 2-week overseas trip. He had been attending a conference abroad, leaving his mountain mansion in the care of trusted staff. That mansion wasn't just a house. It was a symbol of his hard work, standing tall on a ridge with stone walls, glass windows, and a panoramic view of the valley. But as his car climbed the winding road, something felt wrong. The usual sight of his mansion sparkling in the distance was missing. When he finally reached the top, his heart sank. The mansion was gone, reduced to piles of wood, stone, and twisted metal. The garden he once cared for was trampled by heavy machinery. Trucks and bulldozers still sat there, and workers were packing up as if they had finished a job well done. David was frozen in shock. He stepped out of his car, demanding to know what had happened. One of the workers, clearly uncomfortable, handed him a notice taped to the fence post. The paper claimed the HOA had authorized demolition due to unpaid fines and failure to comply with community rules. David's name was typed at the top, but he knew instantly that it was fake. His accounts were always clear. He had never once missed a payment, and more importantly, no HOA had the authority to destroy private property like this. David called his lawyer immediately. Within hours, they secured copies of the HOA's so-called authorization. What they found was shocking. Forged signatures, fake stamps, and documents so sloppily made it obvious someone inside the HOA was covering their tracks. At the center of it all was Brenda, the self-appointed HOA president. She had been notorious for her ruthless fines, her bullying of neighbors, and her obsession with power. But this time, she had crossed a line no one could ignore. The very next day, David arrived at the HOA clubhouse, not as a broken homeowner, but as a man determined to expose the truth. The board meeting was already in session when he walked in. Neighbors turned to look as he carried in a thick folder of evidence. Brenda, sitting at the head of the table, smirked as if she had already won. "You can't just barge in here," she snapped. "Oh, I think I can, especially when you've just demolished my mansion." The room went silent. He laid out the documents on the table, pointing out every forged detail. Neighbors gasped as the reality sunk in. Brenda tried to interrupt, insisting he had ignored notices and refused to pay fines. But David's lawyer, standing by his side, slammed down proof of cleared accounts. The HOA's lies unraveled in front of everyone. That would have been enough for most people, but David wasn't finished. He revealed photographs from security cameras hidden on his property. The footage clearly showed HOA contractors arriving with demolition crews, all under Brenda's orders. Every excuse she had crumbled in seconds. Neighbors who had once been afraid of her began whispering, realizing they too had been victims of her fraudulent fines. Then came the twist Brenda never saw coming. David leaned forward and said, "You've been treating me like any other homeowner, but you never bothered to ask who I really am. I am your governor." The room erupted. Gasps, whispers, and stunned faces filled the hall. Brenda's smug smile vanished. In an instant, she realized the storm she had invited onto herself. David didn't need to raise his voice. He simply explained how her actions weren't just a violation of HOA policy, they were criminal. Fraud, property destruction, extortion, the list went on. And with his position, he had both the influence and the legal power to make sure justice was served. Within days, law enforcement moved in. Brenda and several board members were arrested, charged with fraud, forgery, and destruction of private property. News outlets picked up the story, blasting it across the state. Headlines read, "HOA president arrested after demolishing governor's mansion." The community that once lived under Brenda's shadow was finally free, their stories of harassment now being taken seriously. But David didn't stop there. Using his position, he pushed for broader reforms in HOA laws, ensuring no homeowner would ever face such abuse again. He funded legal assistance for victims of corrupt HOAs and introduced stricter oversight of homeowners associations. The case became a turning point, sparking debates nationwide about the unchecked power of HOAs. As for the mansion, rebuilding began almost immediately. But David decided not to restore it to its original state. Instead, he redesigned it as a community retreat, a place where neighbors could gather free from the fear of corrupt leadership. What was once a symbol of loss became a beacon of resilience. And Brenda? She faced years in behind bars, her reputation destroyed, her empire of fear crumbling overnight. In the end, the HOA thought they could scare a homeowner into submission, but instead,
They picked a fight with the very man who had the power to bring them down. Their arrogance destroyed not just a mansion, but their own future. Justice wasn't just served. It was engraved into the mountains themselves.